Tonight we're dealing with the world of alternate reality and gaming, and we have one of the world's foremost experts to discuss this tonight, Dr. Jane McGonigal. Dr. McGonigal is really an extraordinary blend of academic accomplishment, digital creativity, and game design. She is a TED presenter. She is a regular in publications like The Economist, Wired Magazine, The New York Times, and many others. And she is, of course, the director of game research and development at the Institute for the Future. Her undergraduate degree is from Fordham, and her PhD is from Berkeley. Her new book, Reality is Broken: Why Games Make Us Better and How They Can Change the World, is surprising and comprehensive. Dr. McGonigal draws on history, on sociology, on cognitive science, and on psychology, many other fields, to explore what she sees as our almost primal need to play, to engage, to feel connected in an ever-connected world, and yes, to explore alternate realities in gaming. My favorite parts of the book are actually when she talks about the social need going well back into history, back to Stonehenge in England, and the Gölbekli Tepe in Turkey, and the game-playing Etruscans, talking about the need to engage in epic environments and bringing that right through to the globally connected world of Halo and other environments that hundreds of millions of people around the world now explore. Is her research important, and are her insights worth focusing on at an event like this? Well, consider that in the United States alone, there are now 170 million people who identify themselves as regular gamers. The highest grossing entertainment property in the country in 2010 was not a film, it was not a Broadway play, it was not a book. It was the release of Call of Duty: Modern Warfare 2, which grossed $310 million in its first 24 hours. And consider that the social game pioneer Zynga, just down the road here in Mountain View, now has a larger market capitalization than Electronic Arts. We're happy to welcome Jane to our stage tonight for a wide-ranging conversation about all of these issues, and also to welcome as the moderator and interviewer NPR's Laura Sydell, the senior technology correspondent who's becoming a regular moderator on our stage, almost a part of the museum family, and we're delighted to welcome her back. You'll see her several times this year, and we couldn't be happier. Let me remind you that you have question cards on your chairs. We'll be collecting those in about 45 minutes and passing them up to the stage. So be sure and write your questions down for Dr. Jane McGonigal. Please join me in welcoming her and NPR's Laura Sydell.
So I guess if you thought games were just for fun, Jane basically has a thing or two to say to you. They are for fun, but they can also get us through a crisis, solve the world's major problems. In fact, in your book, you do go back in time, and one of the stories I think that most intrigued me was the story about I guess it's the Lydians, and how they used a game to get through a famine.
Right, right. How many of you know that great tale of ancient Lydia and how they invented dice games? Any ancient Lydian fans here?
I guess not. So you're going to have to tell us.
I'll have to tell you then. It's a good campfire story. So actually, the first written history of gamer addiction comes from ancient Greece. Herodotus was trying to document the origins of dice games that were popular at the time. And according to his research, the dice games had been invented in ancient Lydia, many hundreds of years before him even. And they had been invented by the king of Lydia and his team of problem solvers to help the kingdom overcome a famine. They had an ongoing famine, people were suffering, they needed some way to ease the suffering. So they invented these dice games, and they had the whole kingdom play dice games on one day, and then they would eat on the next, and then they would play the dice games and get so immersed in the dice games that they would forget to eat, essentially, and that they were able to space out the food for 18 years this way and survive the famine, which was very striking to me because it shows, first of all, that games have always been able to immerse us in a way that we forget reality, even without the special effects and the 3D immersion, but also that we could play games as a society in order to deal with real problems.
Well, yeah, as you say, reality is broken, and so that was a moment when reality was broken, and games actually help people get through it. And I believe the story turns out to probably be true. There's actually evidence that this truly happened. It isn't just some myth. There were genetic studies of people who, because eventually half the population left, right?
Yeah, I mean, there was the great surprise ending of this story is that after 18 years, they decided to play one final dice game, and they would divide the country into 2 teams, and the team that won would sail off in search of a new land, and then the rest of them would stay behind and they would have enough resources to feed them. For years, historians thought this was very fanciful and wasn't possibly true, but then 2 pieces of research have shown that it probably is true. Geologists have documented an 18-year cooling in the region that would have led to famine at exactly the time frame that Herodotus was pointing to. And also, they were able to trace the DNA of Etruscans in what is now Italy to the Turkish region, which was ancient Lydia, and they believe that the Etruscans actually came from ancient Lydia, that they were the people who left after this dice game. So not only did they play the game to ease their suffering, but eventually they played a game for real stakes and a real way to solve the problem.
Which is amazing, and amazing just to think how much a part of culture games have always been.
Right.
And not an unimportant part. I mean, you know, we talk about fun and games, and most people kind of write off games as, well, a waste of time.
Exactly.
And if we come to the present day, we began to hear some of the kind of amazing figures, but you have some figures in your book really about the amount of time, the number of people and the amount of time people actually spend playing games. And if you can recall some of these figures, I was kind of like, oh my God, I can't believe that.
Yeah, so there are 500 million people now on the planet who spend at least an hour a day playing online games. And collectively, they spend 3 billion hours a week playing games, which is pretty staggering. Just to put that number in perspective, about a year ago, Clay Shirky and researchers at IBM calculated how long it had taken to create all of Wikipedia, all of the articles, every edit, as well as every line of code. And they calculated it at 100 million hours. So at that rate, gamers could put together a couple dozen Wikipedias every week with the same collective effort that they're putting into, saving virtual worlds. On top of that, we know that young people in America have spent 10,000 hours playing games by the age of 21. The later you were born after 1980, the more likely this is to be true. But 10,000 hours is the same amount of time that they spend in the classroom for all of middle school and high school. So it's really quite the sort of parallel education system that we have going on.
Now, you would say, of course, why is this? Why are people playing so many games? And this quote from your book, which struck me as a rather bleak view of reality. Reality is too easy. Reality is depressing. It's unproductive and hopeless. It's disconnected and trivial. It's hard to get into. It's pointless, unrewarding, lonely, and isolating. It's hard to swallow. It's unsustainable. It's unambitious. It's disorganized and divided. It's stuck in the present. So
that's basically a summary of the book, yes.
So why not play games, right?
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, reality is not always these things. But what I try to do in the book is find all of the ways that games help us tap into the best version of ourselves, the most curious, the most optimistic, the most resilient in the face of failure, the most likely to collaborate at extreme scales. And after we're done doing all those things in games, we go back to reality and it feels disorganized, it feels uncooperative, it feels unambitious. It doesn't mean we can't be all those things in reality. It's just that we're not primed to look for those opportunities or to feel those inspiring feelings in real life. We're trying to fix that, is the idea.
That is the, well, you talk about in this how there are a lot of things that people do in games that in fact are showing the best parts of what it is to be human. For example, cooperation.
Right, yeah. No, increasingly games are cooperative. I mean, that's a big trend in gaming that I think mainstream media has missed out on. Today, gamers prefer cooperative play to competitive play on an average of 3 to 1. Cooperative games outsell competitive games 3 to 1. And so it's really different from what we've seen before. And this is something that's very particular to video games and computer games. You know, if you look at the history of gaming, gaming has typically either been a solitary thing or competitive. Your team against another team, you against other players. Now we have these games where every player is on the same side. It's a very different emotional quality to the play. It's a different skill set that you develop, and it turns out to be much more effective at creating really powerful social bonds. So that's something that video games get to claim all to themselves.
Well, Farmville, right? You like help with your neighbor's farm
Yes.
and do things like that.
Yeah, not the most sophisticated example of cooperative gameplay.
No, but it is. You're right. No, you're right.
But it's fundamentally pro-social. You get to take care of things for your friends. And we know a lot of people play those games because it feels more meaningful than just leaving them a message, you know, to actually help them get something they want. It feels like you're taking care of each other.
You say something in the book, though, even about when you're talking about games like where people are shooting each other. Just because the kills don't have value doesn't mean they don't have meaning.
Right. Yeah. And this is a chapter in the book that people who don't play games have gotten the most upset at me for writing, because I talk about the Halo series, which is an incredibly popular series that has people been playing the series for a decade now. And there's a sprawling story, and there are millions of players. And they band together to do interesting things inside the game. Like they decided they wanted to collectively achieve 6 billion kills, or the equivalent of every man and woman and child on Earth. I should point out that they were killing aliens who were hell-bent on exterminating the human species. So, you know, it was
an act of heroism, right?
Worthy mission. But, you know, they banded together to do this. They worked together as a community. And when you were playing the game by yourself or with your friends, you knew that every alien that you took out was adding to that collective total. So you were part of a bigger mission. And what I find interesting is, you know, yes, that doesn't actually help the real world in any way, but it does start to tap into our desire to be of service to a larger cause. And so it doesn't mean that, you know, it's pointless. We see these gamers are they're tapping into something that is fundamentally a human craving, the desire to be a part of something bigger. And so I see that as an opportunity. If gamers are feeling that, you know, are there other things we could tap them into, like curing cancer or ending poverty? Yes,
well,
we can.
Yeah, and I mean we're gonna get to that, but I think there is some sense. I mean, who is playing games? And a lot of times it's people who feel alienated. So so it's tapping into something in us where we want to connect with other people.
Right, absolutely. And we know that a lot of people who play online games identify as introverted, or they have social anxiety. People with Asperger's are using games to try and find new ways for stronger social connection. And the research is starting to come out that these games serve as a kind of gateway or springboard, that you can start to associate within your brain positive rewards of gaming with social interaction. So for somebody who's not normally motivated by social engagement, they become motivated by social engagement even when they're not playing the games. So it's actually a way to help people become more social in real life, not just in the games.
I mean, I found this part really interesting, the idea of just really carefully looking into the things that a game might bring out in you. And I believe you, at one point you said that people who learn how to share, kids who do cooperative games, are actually more cooperative in the real world.
Right, yeah, there have been a number of studies all over the world actually, from Holland to Malaysia, Japan, and the US, looking at if you get kids playing what they call pro-social games, which is where you have to help other characters, like Super Mario Sunshine. You land on an island, it's been polluted, and there's graffiti everywhere, and you clean up the island and make everybody happy. People who play games like that spend make 3 times as much effort in real life helping another student with homework, or helping housemate with chores. And so they're still trying to unpack why that is, but they believe it's this sort of cognitive model that you develop a radar where you're looking for opportunities to help, because when you're in the game, you're like, where can I help? Who can I help? Where can I help? And that cognitive framework seems to go into real life.
Yeah, which is, I mean, I guess there's some sense to that. If this is in a game, there are rules, you're in this world, you're kind of learning the rules, so why not take those rules elsewhere?
Yeah.
And I guess if a game is Grand Theft Auto, which is what I think a lot of people think
Yeah.
of, you know, that doesn't sound very good. But,
Yeah.
but
No, well, I'm glad
right?
you mentioned that because it's worth mentioning. You know, when you talk about that, you immediately, I'm sure many of you thought, well, if the good carries over into real life, doesn't the negative? And it's worth pointing out that they have found a couple of real negative effects of games, and people research this for a lot, and they know that aggressive driving games can make you drive more aggressively in real life. Violent games do not make you more violent in real life, but it can desensitize you to media expressions of violence or violence elsewhere. Now, but what's interesting about that is it turns out that can be a benefit to some people. So soldiers who play 3 to 4 hours of violent video games like Call of Duty or Halo have incredibly low rates of nightmares, post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, suicide attempts. I've actually worked with the Army's mental health assessment team to try and figure out why this is. And there's new research to suggest that by being desensitized to impressions of violence, they're able to not internalize the violence that they're around, and that they can take the feelings of optimism and control in the game environment and use that to offset how out of control they feel in the field. So it turns out to be very helpful to desensitize some people to violence, but you wouldn't necessarily want your kids to be desensitized
Well,
at
that's
home.
the problem,
Yeah.
I think. You know, those sorts of games, I think, make people very nervous.
Yeah.
But you're talking about games in a different way in the book, and I think you do a good job of laying out the potential that you see in so many of these games. You were talking about bringing things in the real world, and among the games that you mentioned that I was most intrigued by was Chore Wars.
Yeah. Any Chore War players in the house? This is
I'm
one,
ready to join up on
I
this
see
one.
one. Good. This is one for everyone of all ages, right? It's a game you play at your home. You go onto a website and you create your party, which is whoever you live with, and then you and your roommates, your family, your household, you create a series of quests that correspond with real chores, like taking out the trash or cleaning the toilet. And then for the most hated chores that nobody ever wants to do, they're worth the most experience points, and they have the highest probability of finding virtual loot. When you do the real chore in real life, you log in, you claim the XP, and you see if you got any loot. And you play this for a weekend or a week or a month, and at the end of it, you can see who's gotten the most XP and the most loot and trade it in for different things. Like my husband and I might use it to decide what to cook for dinner or what DVD to watch.
So you get your favorite tonight because you did the nastiest
I have the
chores?
most XP. I'll cash in, 100 gold coins or whatever. But what's really cool, I mean, the testimonials to this game are great because women are saying, my husband cleaned the toaster and I almost fell over, like in shock. My kids were racing to make their beds first thing in the morning. We had an incident where I had to hide the toilet brush from my husband because he was threatening to overtake me, and that's great. And so the good thing about this game, it's silly, but it's amazing how it cuts out tension in the household. Instead of having to nag your kids or get into arguments about who's done what, people just do it on their own. So it's a very simple solution to use what motivates us about games to improve our daily lives.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, so often certain things are so serious. And the thing about playing a game is you think, oh, it's fun and games, right? So it's taking, I think part of the point you're trying to make in the book is that it's taking that sense of fun and trying to bring it to something like a chore. Right. And then we move forward into more complex problems that you could take these skills to do. I mean, for example, one game you mention in the book is World Without Oil. Mm-hmm. Which was, I guess, a public television experiment. This is an interesting game, and here's where you sort of use some of the basic components of a game to take on a major world problem.
Mm-hmm. And actually, the creator of World Without Oil is here tonight, I believe. Ken Eklund, are you here? Just raise your hand right over there. Everybody bombard him at the end of this talk with questions about amazing games that can change the world, because he's made quite a few. World Without Oil was an online collaborative simulation of a peak oil scenario. So what happens if global output of oil can no longer keep up with global demand? So we created this fictional scenario where the United States was particularly hit hard. You would sign up to play and tell us where you live, and we would give you real-time updates on the scenario based on where you live. We had this little alternate reality dashboard, and you could see how your economy was being affected, whether you were getting food delivered, could the trucks bring the food, could the buses get the kids to school, and we would ask you to make real-life choices as if the scenario were true. So if you couldn't get gas in the scenario to fill up your car, how are you going to get to work? To actually try to get to work in a different way. If the food wasn't being delivered from more than 10 miles away, could you make dinner with just locally available food? And then they would document this with blog posts and videos and photo essays. So we had just under 2,000 people spend their 6 weeks living in this fictional crisis. And at the end of it, they'd created thousands of guidelines for how to survive if we actually were in a peak oil scenario. Everything about, what kind of sermon would you deliver at church on Sunday? If you were trying to take a hot girl out for a Saturday night date, how would you do that? And what was great, really fascinating, was a year later in the United States, after we first ran the game, we had a real gas crisis. Prices in reality hit our fictional prices in the game.
Well, actually, I believe the game, we were talking earlier, the game actually starts with a sort of fake news thing. Gas prices just hit $4 a gallon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah.
Right?
And then they did. It seemed crazy at the time, yeah.
At the time, that seemed like a lot. So,
and so then we were able to hear from players about how they still had the habits in place from the simulation, or that they had these strategies ready that they were able to share with their neighbors and their friends and family. So we were able to see that it made a real difference. There's actually a blog that Ken has created called World Without Oil Lives, where you can see some of the aftermath of the game. But the best thing about it is it's all online. You can still play it. So we've had many classrooms, community groups, families play. So you can actually see if you could survive 6 weeks of a peak oil scenario. It's fun, it's hard, but it's worthwhile.
Well, some of the solutions people came up with too were things like, wearing a solar headband that would charge your iPod. Mm-hmm. So, and there was even one that had to do with NASCAR, I think.
Well, of course, NASCAR fans were very concerned about peak oil because it would be detrimental. So they were looking into alternative vehicle racing as a potential hobby, and that was great.
No, but see, you're laughing, and this is the
but it
thing.
really happened.
And it is a real crisis. And this is, I think, part of what's very engaging about what you're saying is that you're bringing people into a game. And actually, you have a great definition of a game, the way you phrase it in the book, which is
games are unnecessary obstacles that we volunteer to tackle. Yeah. Golf is the best example because, right?
Clearly,
maybe I don't even need to explain.
Audience,
but
right?
In golf, you have a goal, which is to get a little ball in a little hole. And if it weren't a game, the way you would approach this goal would be to pick up the ball and put it in the hole. But because it's a game, you agree to stand really far away and use a stick. So that's what taps into our curiosity and our creativity and our optimism and our desire to get good at something that we're bad at. And that's what we did with World Without Oil. Obviously, it's not an unnecessary obstacle to consume less oil. It's real. But we were able to frame it in a way, 6-week survival challenge. Could you do it? That we could make it feel like an unnecessary obstacle and tap into their curiosity. Yeah.
Yeah, which you talk about these things, and even, I think being in the news business, right, and you're taking on something serious, and there's a serious tone, and I think so often that sort of turns people off, actually, of dealing with real problems.
Right, yeah. That's the one thing we know about games, is if we can get you to undertake the challenge out of your own interest and self-motivation, that you will enter the state of positive stress or eustress, where you're more motivated, you're more resilient in the face of failure, you're more likely to ask others for help, and you become more likable to others because you're energized and optimistic, so they're actually more likely to help you when you ask for it. And so this is kind of optimal state of human being. And when you're in this optimal state, in games, you all know you can stay at the game for hours and hours, even if you're just failing and failing and failing. It turns out most gamers spend 80% of their time failing, which is really fascinating. If you were to compare that with real life, most of us don't have that stamina to keep going 80% of the time failing. We're trying to bring that positive stress and that stamina that we get from unnecessary obstacles to real life.
Yeah, I think you call it fun failure. in the
Yeah,
book?
failure's fun in games because you learn from failure safely. And you know, if it's, I'd love to mention an example from the real world because a lot of times when I talk about fun failure in games, people say, well, this is absurd because in real life there are consequences to failure and it's only fun to fail in games because there's no consequences. But what we're learning from game design is that maybe we could make fewer consequences for failure in the real world and have better results. So there's a school in New York City called Quest to Learn that the whole curriculum has been co-designed by game designers. It doesn't mean that they're playing games all day. It means that the way tests are designed or the way that courses are structured is like a game. And one of the things that they've implemented is a test-taking policy where if you don't like your grade, you can take the test again. And you can decide when you are satisfied with your grade. This is how we play games. I keep taking the quest or redoing the level until I'm happy with my performance. It turns out that kids actually learn better this way. In fact, there's a lot of scientific research from the past couple years showing that we learn more by taking tests than we do by studying, because the test makes us actually examine what we don't know and see what our performance really is. So not only does it help us learn more, but it also takes the punishment out of school. I mean, we're so punishing a failure in schools. These poor kids, you fail once and that's it. For life, it's permanent. Why do we have to be so punishing a failure in schools? And, we don't have to. That's a decision. That's a design decision. So we can look at games and see that maybe if we made real world more like them and less punishing a failure is one thing to look at, we can achieve better results and a better emotional state.
Most games, though, they're made commercially, and largely it's about getting people as addicted to a game as you possibly can. And I guess I wonder how you could really translate that, or is there any way the commercial world would really even be interested in taking some of that creative power and using it for these things? I mean, there still is that sense. I mean, I think 2,000 people fully participated in World Without Oil, that you could really draw in the kind of huge numbers that you get with a game like World of Warcraft.
Right. So there are a couple of things. I mean, one is we are seeing the commercial game industry start to get interested in this space. One of my favorite serious games from the past year was done at the University of Washington with scientists, but they also recruited some of Halo's game designers and engineers to work on the game. So they had some of the greatest game designers working with scientists to make a game that would help gamers cure cancer or work towards curing cancer by folding protein in a virtual environment. Turns out that gamers are really good at folding proteins in novel ways that could be used to create medicines for things like Alzheimer's and cancer. They're better than most scientists who have training in it, and they're better than supercomputers who have algorithms to fold proteins. In fact, they published a paper in Nature Journal this year listing 57,000 gamers as co-authors for this paper on curing cancer. So there you see people from within the industry joining forces. Now 57,000, still not 13 million, right. But we don't really need everybody who plays commercial video games to play these problem-solving games. 57,000 people working on curing cancer who'd never done it before. That's a huge leap forward.
Well, I know, actually, I think I did a story a while back about how epidemiologists also found that virtual worlds and games were a great place to really understand how people were going to respond if there was an epidemic.
Right. Yeah, we just had at the Game Developers Conference last week that researcher presented some of her work. Yeah, because she was saying that scientists have a hard time of predicting how people will act in reality in a crisis, and that you can put them in a game world and get really surprised. So they had a pandemic in World of Warcraft that was killing your avatar virtually instantly and leaving lasting damage. And they thought most people would be smart enough to stay away from the pandemic sites, but in fact people were curious and going to see what was going on. And they realized that they didn't have this in any of their models. The CDC doesn't have a model for curious gawkers who want to see what's going on. But you can imagine, of course, that this would in fact happen. So they've now since changed the real models they use to study contagious diseases to include this social propensity to gawk at the news.
So, people are probably curious at this point too. How did a girl like you get so interested in games?
Yeah. I was a geek growing up. I'm part of computer history. I had a Commodore 64 when I was 10 years old. Best computer ever, right? So I programmed my first game when I was 10 in basic language, which is awesome. Can I use this opportunity to describe my awesome first game I ever made? Because nobody's ever played it.
Here they are. You've got to. They're not leaving. They're still here.
Only my mom and sister have played this game, so really marvel at how special it is that you will now know how it works. It was called You Be the Judge. And it was a text adventure in which you would hear testimony in a trial, and you would rule on objections from the lawyers, and then you would decide if they were guilty or not guilty. But I was using ASCII art, and I couldn't figure out how to draw a person, but I could figure out how to draw a cat. So you were a cat, and you were the judge. And I made this great animation of a gavel going up and down, and the colors blinking, and that was my first game. So, pretty awesome. So then I was not quite as much a geek in high school and college, and I got into theater. And I was actually in grad school for theater at UC Berkeley. I came out for my first semester looking for a job, something fun to do. And there was a startup company in San Francisco called the Go Game, looking to run games in real life urban spaces using mobile phones. They would send you location-specific social missions. And I said, oh, you need a stage manager, clearly, because you've got people running around, they'll make props, sets, actors, and I convinced them to hire me, and that was my first game design job. They're actually still going, really successful game company here in the Bay Area, but they were one of the first companies, in fact, the first company in the United States to try to do this alternate reality blurring of the lines of game world and real world. So I just kind of got lucky and wandered into their office and got going that way.
I guess then how did you start to realize, in this process, being in the game world, the commercial game world, where they're not really thinking about, saving the world, how did you start to realize that, oh, gee, games could be something that could do something really positive in the world?
Yeah, so there were two big aha moments. The first was working on the Go game. We were playing it in the Mission, in Chinatown, in North Beach, and you would find that people who played the game, it was just for a few hours, they felt differently about the neighborhood. So they were more likely to go back to the Mission, even if they'd never been there before. They were more likely to talk to a stranger or to go into a new space. And they would even report just feeling confident and curious as they walked down streets. It sort of changed the way they felt about this environment permanently. So I thought, well, this is really interesting. Maybe we could have this effect in other areas. But also that same semester, this was the fall of 2001, and I had been playing an online game earlier that year that was very much about collective intelligence and collaboration. We had a team of about 40,000 people playing together, all on the same team, doing collective intelligence. The game ended in July, and then 9/11 happened, and the gamers came back to the Gamer Forum that day. And many of them wanted to figure out if we could use our collective intelligence skills first to investigate what had happened, because nobody understood it, to see if they could find lost loved ones, to see if they could help with relief efforts somehow. And they felt so empowered in the game world, they thought they had real skills and abilities that they could use as a team, the same team. And I was really startled by this. They debated a lot back and forth. They felt guilty about it at first. They were like, wait, there's a difference between games and reality. We can't pretend this is a game. But some of them were like, why not? We have skills and abilities. So that triggered me also to start thinking about, are there ways to actually bridge gamers' experience of being successful in games and having real skills and their desire to do something in the real world?
And you also had, although this might have been more recent, you had a concussion.
Yeah.
And you actually helped cure yourself using a game.
Yeah. It's
true. That sounds kind of wild, right? To sort of cure yourself using a game. But I found the story really interesting. And also you are used to designing games, and so your mind, I think, kind of went there too.
Yeah. This summer of 2009, I had what was first a simple concussion, but it didn't heal quickly. It was a month later, and I still couldn't really read or write. I had nausea and vertigo all the time. And I was actually in the middle of writing this book. I was about halfway through writing it. I was on sabbatical from the Institute for the Future, and I couldn't do anything. I couldn't write. I was so panicked. I thought my brain would never heal and I was doomed. And my doctor was explaining to me that anxiety and depression are a symptom of a brain injury, but you have to stop yourself from feeling that way because it biochemically inhibits healing. So you have to find a way to feel happy and optimistic, which I had a very hard time doing with all the reality of what was going on.
Because reality is tough.
Yeah, reality's tough, and it's really
you
tough
needed to get out
when
of
you can't
it,
think.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I couldn't play video games because they were too stimulating. So my normal go-to for optimism wasn't available to me. The other thing is that it was socially isolating. I mean, you know how it is when you get sick. People don't know how to act around you. They're nervous. They don't come see you as much as maybe they want to. So I was isolated too. Fortunately, I was in the middle of writing a book about how games provoke positive emotions and strengthen our social relationships. So I had this one little moment of clarity where I thought I should turn this into a game, and that will somehow bring me out of this darkness. And so I created this game where you go on a heroic journey based on your favorite hero's story. So I liked Buffy the Vampire Slayer, so I became Jane the Concussion Slayer. And the way the game works is you find roles for people in your life to adopt. So, you know, if you were Batman, you would have your Alfred and your Robin and the Mayor. I had a Watcher, and I had a Willow and a Xander. Like, Xander is the comic relief character. So I asked a couple of my friends to be my comic relief, come over once a week and make me laugh. And so anyway, it was this sort of hacked together game, but it ended the depression and social loneliness for me, so that my brain did start to heal right away. 48 hours of playing the game, I started to feel that suffering lift. And now we're doing clinical trials for it at Ohio State University Medical Center, and we're expanding it to help people with everything from asthma, diabetes, losing weight, quitting smoking, chemotherapy, and so the game will be available for free later this year.
It seems like, I mean, it fits into, you know, stories you hear about people getting better from laughter and things like this, and this would make a lot of sense too. It gets you engaged and gets you feeling playful. I have to say though, I wonder how many people come up to you and say, "Oh, come on," you know? I mean, really, and then they throw at you sort of the litany of the terrible things about games.
Yep.
You know, the awful games, the shoot 'em up, and all of that. I mean, how often do you get people who kind of do that? Like, give me a break.
Yeah, every day. But that's why I start in the book with gamers 3,000 years ago, because I think it's really important to realize that we're at a very specific moment in the history of games. I mean, here we are at a museum about computer history. Games have not always been about guns and shooting. Games have not always had graphic violence. I'll be the first person to admit there are things in games today that I am uncomfortable with, and games that I don't like to play because I feel icky or just bad when I play them. But we need to have a bigger point of view. You know, that humans have been playing games as a way to organize ourselves and motivate ourselves since we've been human. And moving forward, we need to take what's powerful about video games, the way they inspire cooperation, the way they network us globally, the way they can be played at epic scales. We don't have to keep everything about games. Nothing would make me happier if 20 years from now, you know, shooter games are like kind of archaic the way Pong is. You know, that would actually make me happy. So what I try to tell people who say, "Come on, you know, this is crazy," is just think more broadly about games. It's not just about the latest game that sold, you know, a lot of copies.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, you know, I've often, I did a piece a while about USC's gaming program where they teach it there, and that was also the place that had the first film program at a time when film wasn't taken very seriously as an art form. And of course, if you think about film, there are some films that are shoot-'em-up films, and there are films that are profound and deep and make you reflect on life.
Oh yeah, and think about what all the early films were. They were train crashes, they were elephants getting electrocuted, they were naked ladies dancing. I mean, that's not indicative of where the film genre went. So, I mean,
well,
it might be, maybe it is. But it also went other places with a lot more interesting social, you know, value. Yeah.
Well, let's take some questions. I'm going to go with this one. So, why do you think, someone asks, play has such a bad reputation, and how can we get adults to take it more seriously?
Yeah. So the biggest problem with play is that we've been told that it's the opposite of work. And that's an idea that I try to undermine in my book. One of the best insights I've ever had about play came from a psychologist named Brian Sutton Smith, who was studying play long before video games came out. And he proposed that the opposite of play isn't work, it's depression. And that's something that was another aha moment for me, because when we play, especially games, we're energized, we're optimistic about our possibility for success. It really is the opposite of depression. So I think it's time for a new comparison, not to compare play with work, because we know when we play games, we actually work very hard. I mean, games are challenging by design. It's harder to get a golf ball in a hole standing far away with a stick than just walking up to it. So the opposite of play isn't work, it's depression. Maybe if everybody leaves with that, and you can just whip that out the next time somebody tells you, not to play, it's not valuable, that would be a good start, maybe.
Well, yeah, I mean, and there is a sense of, when you're really engaged in life is exciting, challenges are exciting, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, so more like games, Life can be more like a game.
Yeah.
Or is sometimes like a game. So somebody asked, what is your favorite game besides Chore Wars? And what do you play in your free time?
Yeah, in my free time, there's a game called Peggle that I really like. I recommend it because you can play it on anything. You can play it on your computer, you can play it on your Xbox, you can play it on your phone. And what's great about this game is that whenever you complete a level, they throw a parade in your honor. They play Ode to Joy. There is a rainbow sparkling. And I play it when I'm not feeling productive. And it helps me feel like I'm really getting something done. Yes, I used to love, briefly, I had a very brief love affair with World of Warcraft, and then I recognized that I need to wait until I retire to go back to that game. But I learned a lot from it about engaging design, so I appreciate that brief love affair.
Well, that's, one of the problems for me with a lot of games, I'm really enchanted by some of the artwork and the depth of them. I really thought Spore was cool, the Will Wright game where you create all these virtual worlds, but to find the time to do them sometimes, that's the thing. I think a lot of the games you're talking about here, that might help people and things, and even we spoke earlier about World Without Oil. It doesn't take an enormous amount of time to get into some of these games, but they're enjoyable.
Yeah, and the other thing is, people play games for different reasons, right? So people who don't have a creative outlet in real life or in their real workplace are more drawn to games that have a creative element, like Spore, or like a new game, Minecraft is really awesome, and really creative. Whereas people who feel like they have really amazing jobs that are overwhelming are more likely to play these 5-minute, like Angry Birds, and they look for a short escape to just get something right and then go back to work. So people play for different reasons, and we might look at someone else's game and say, I don't know how you have the time. They might look at our game and say, I don't know how you find that satisfying. What I'm doing is so much more meaningful and creative. So, but that's okay, because we play games to fulfill emotional needs, and we have different emotional needs.
Right. Here's somebody talking about a game that helped them. I think this is kind of interesting. 2 years ago, I was viciously depressed and could not keep my attention on anything for even a minute. I sat in my living room playing solitaire and waiting to die. Obviously, that game was not helpful, but then a friend got me started on World of Warcraft, and it literally healed me. I'm a new person, more functional than ever. Can you comment on this?
Yeah, absolutely. So we know that many people who play MMOs are self-treating for depression and anxiety. It's something that's been tracked for a while now. Or people thought originally that there was a correlation between the games causing depression, but it looks now more that it's like self-treatment. And so that is something very common. Women tend to self-treat more often with casual games. There's research that just came out this year showing that playing online games like Bejeweled can be very effective for moderate, mild depression or mild anxiety, as effective as drugs, in fact, for sort of mundane cases. For MMOs, we tend to hear about people going through something tougher and using the games as a way to spark that sense of purpose and progress and social connection. And then what we try to do is make sure that you get back to your real life in a meaningful way. One of the things that you can do is watch how long you're playing. As you start to play more than 20 hours a week, it starts to open you up to negative impacts of gaming. We know that if you're playing more than 30 hours a week, that it is almost certainly having a negative impact on real life social relationships, unless you're playing in the same room with the people you care about most. That mitigates it. But so, what I would say to people, you can use these games to survive very dark times, but then to watch for that 30-hour number and try and pull yourself back from it as soon as you can.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure actually you and I had talked about this a little bit before, that whole idea of addiction,
Yeah.
and walking that line, because game addiction, I mean, in certain countries, South Korea, China, they're actually starting to treat this, and they have clinics for it.
Yeah.
So that, it strikes me that that's something you could really worry about in this. Even if you were dealing with, world without oil, maybe you could get addicted
to,
I don't know,
to the intensity of trying to survive. No, actually, I mean, yeah, and the thing we worry about with addiction is that you're distracted from real life goals and real life relationships. As games become more connected to real life goals and real life relationships, we won't worry as much. So people who play Nike Plus, which is, a running game, if you get addicted to it, you're probably spending more time running with your real life friends and family. We don't worry about somebody getting addicted to that because we know it has, you're pursuing real life goals with real life friends and family. So that's something I think we'll worry less about gamer addiction as the games become more integrated with our real lives.
And you're seeing it with things like Connect, where it's, they're getting you off your butt and you're in front of the television set moving. So let's see, would you talk to games' effectiveness as a medium for narrative?
Yeah, I mean, games are an amazing medium for narrative. It's increasingly we know that games are packed with actual text. I mean, there's a game Dragon Age that came out that had 8 to 9 novels worth of narrative written in it.
It's amazing.
It's really amazing. And we know that the kind of stories that people are telling, they often do have this heroic sense, which is, we love hero stories. We love the heroic journey. It's something that's intrinsic to human nature. But in games, you get to be a part of that journey, right? So it's like hearing this great legend, but then you become the legend. So we do see that these stories have they can really stay with you. And even one of my favorite video games, I oddly think about when I'm working out for no reason. I mean, here's the strangest thing you'll hear all day. Has anybody played the game Portal? Right. I think there's a theme song at the end of Portal. I'm still alive. And when I'm working out, I think about how I survived that game, and I'm going to survive this workout, and I sing the song in my head, and sometimes out loud. But it's because the narrative in that game was so compelling that I really feel like I survived something in that game, and then I try and bring that, to real life. So the stories can stay with you.
That's a good thing. I mean, stories, poems stay with me,
Yeah.
and songs do stay with you, and all these things. I mean, the thing about any art form, and I think increasingly games are becoming an art form, is it should stay with you, right? It sticks with you as something powerful that you can refer back to. Here's actually a good follow-up question. Do you have concerns that the extrinsic rewards provided by alternative reality games such as Chore Wars reduce the intrinsic motivation for doing the right thing without the involvement of a game?
Yes, good, great question. Big thing that game designers are grappling with. Last week at the Game Developer Conference, we had an entire day looking at intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. I have an opinion on this that is not shared by everybody, but my opinion is that if there's something in life that is hard for you and causing you pain and suffering, like arguing with your family every weekend about who should clean something up, that if a game provides extrinsic motivation and it helps you reduce that pain or anxiety or suffering, that you should do it. And then what we look for is evidence that even when you're not playing the game, that the behavior is kept up. Right. So, most people don't play Chore Wars forever. They play it for a weekend or a month, and then now they sort of get it. Okay, this is my role. I have this habit. I don't think we should try to play these games forever. But there are people making games where they're trying to get you to do things that maybe aren't what you really care about, right. And they're putting badges and achievements and levels and points on things like, go to the store and check out this new, order this thing on the menu and we'll give you an achievement badge. I mean, that's horrible. We shouldn't do that.
Well, there's things like Foursquare.
Yeah, Foursquare's in between, right? Yeah. I mean, the original idea with Foursquare was there's this great Xbox Live gag, achievement unlocked, left the house. And that's sort of the Foursquare, the original desire of Foursquare was like, okay, it's really hard to get out and be social, even though we all want to. We get tired, we get exhausted, and we don't do it. Could we use a game to get people to do the thing they really want to do? I mean, and so I'm all for games that help us do what we want to do. And if it's a really intrinsically satisfying activity, then we will keep doing it afterwards. And if it's not, then we don't have to do it anymore.
Well, I guess with chores, the thing is if you don't keep doing them, then you got to live in the house where you haven't been doing your chores. So there is sort of, those real life motivations. But one kind of worries, it's sort of like when you train a dog, right? And they get used to, like, they won't give you their paw unless there's a cookie.
Yes. No, and we know that's true. So that's why the game designers are all sitting around in our offices and our conferences saying, we don't want people to stop doing the behavior when the game is over. This game is not successful if that's what happens. So we're looking for that. It's absolutely true that that's a potential problem. It would be a way for these games to not work. So yeah, we're on it.
Yes. So somebody here is asking about America's Army. Mm-hmm. How effective do you find America's Army and similar games distributed by government organizations?
Yeah, well, very effective. That game, I'm sure you guys all know this game. It's been used as a popular recruitment tool for the U.S. Army. One of the things that's interesting about the game is that you are always, it's multiplayer, so you're playing against other players, but both players think that they're the U.S. Army. You see the other player as the enemy. Yeah. You both think that you're the U.S. Army, which is just funny and interesting. It's successful. They have the highest click-through rate at the time that they released of any government online experience had ever had, of people clicking through to a real recruitment office. We need America's Army for other things. To give you an example, a friend of mine has a new platform called Ground Crew, and it lets you send and get missions on your mobile phone for real-life social action. So they've got a game based on Farmville, where in Farmville, even if you guys don't play, if you're on Facebook, you've gotten the message from your friends to go feed their chickens or whatever. In real life, you could be walking down a street and get a message, and there's a community garden around the corner. There's an urban farm around the corner. Could you please stop and feed this real chicken or water this real crop? And that's the kind of then suddenly Farmville becomes America's Army for community gardens. Like, that would be cool. So they do seem to work, but we should use them for other things, not just military recruitment.
Well, the next question here is actually, I think, kind of works well as a segue. Both social and competitive games create social networks, most commonly in the form of friends lists. How well do these networks transition out of the virtual and into helping in real issues?
Yeah, so people are just starting to look at the impact of the genre of social games on real-life social relationships. And there was a significant study published in the last couple months looking at whether social gameplay leads to any more significant social interaction. Do you talk to people more if you've played a game with them? Does it change how you feel about them? And so far, it's very mixed results. They found that people do report feeling more connected with people that they play, and that there's a very modest uptick in interacting with them outside of the game as well. But nothing super dramatic yet. But of course, social games today really that social. And so social game developers are now trying to figure out how can we make social games really feel like you're actually being social or actually require you to be social.
Like
to be in the same room. Like for example, Facebook games, you basically they're all single player games,
right.
But you just visit your friends and help them. Social games should be multiplayer, real-time, synchronous, cooperative, or Facebook games that require you to be, in front of the same computer with another person is also something people are looking at. Yes, I mean the one thing to say about real social gaming, when you're playing in the same room as someone else, is that magnifies all of the possible positive impacts of games very significantly. The positive emotions are felt more strongly, your confidence, your sense of cooperation and trust, building up your social relationships, which is one thing I recommend to gamers or parents of gamers. You should try and spend at least half of your time, however long you play games, actually playing in the same space with a friend or family member, because there's something incredibly beneficial about that we don't necessarily see with every kind of games.
Well, I mean, and I think, the game companies, the Wii and now Kinect, I mean, you're really seeing, and Sony's done it too, ways to make games something that families do together.
Exactly.
And it seems like that's working with, Nintendo sold incredibly well. Kinect is, what did I see? I saw some figures that were in the millions since it's come out, and it hasn't even been out 12 months. So, but here's a good question. Who is supposed to pay for these games that change the world? Why is it that McDonald's is willing to spend millions on games to sell burgers, but the government does little or nothing? We could have the Corporation for Public Broadcasting pay for games, like in this instance.
Yeah.
I mean, actually, that has been something in public media. There have been experiments like this.
Yeah, so I mean, the space is changing pretty rapidly. I've been working on games like this for a number of years, and I have worked with a whole host of different people funding the games, from McDonald's and the International Olympics Committee to the World Bank Institute, to ITVS, which is part of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. And so far the games have been funded either by nonprofits, organizations that have a mission and they want to use this as a way to accomplish the mission out of their marketing or community engagement budgets. And then you also see for-profit companies who see it as a way to do social good or be visibly identified as being a part of social good. And think about, that's a model that this could happen. But now we're seeing a lot of venture capital investment in these kinds of games that have revenue models. And in fact, I have a startup company now called Social Chocolate, where we are going to be making games that we think will actually be able to generate revenue, not requiring foundations to just give money to the games. So I think that landscape is changing very quickly. If we can't figure out how to make money with these games, they're not going to be made at big enough scale or for a long enough time.
Well, and it seems like, too, if it's something that people are really engaged by, I mean, that's also an incentive to make the games more engaging. Because if you're trying to draw in more people, and I guess the tough thing is to find that balance between drawing in more people, drawing in more revenue, and also keeping some kind of positive social mission.
Exactly. It's tough. This is not an easy battle that anybody's fighting to get that combination of save the world and epic fun. But right, it would be good for there to be some kind of a commercial pressure to be engaging, not just, it's better than the old way of, teaching people about peak oil. It is better, but we could also be better than, movies and other art forms as well.
Well, that's actually something I was thinking about. I mean, if you're engaged in a game, is it going to have a stronger impact on you than watching a movie? So if you go see, An Inconvenient Truth and you learn about climate change, is the experience of playing some kind of game related to climate change going to have a stronger impact? I mean, is there any research on that?
Yeah, people are measuring that with some of the games that have been made around social issues, and definitely there does seem to be, if you've had a long enough exposure to the game, so the equivalent amount of time that you would spend watching a movie, if you can play the game for 2 hours, there does seem to be a more measurable cognitive shift. Particularly where we see people saying that they've changed their mind about something as a result of playing the game versus as a result of watching more passive media. The key, of course, is to make a game that is as engaging for as long a time as we can sit in front of a screen and watch stories unfold. But if we have to actively engage them, that's more challenging.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is another, to keep somebody really like doing something, although you'd be surprised. I have an addiction to spider solitaire. I don't, which is just, that's my way, like, to sort of let off steam. And
You're not in your living room waiting to die.
What? No, no. It just, it's something about I don't know. When I need to let off steam, I've had to take it off a few computers because it's also.
Put it back on. It's good for you.
Is the finite nature of games, the self-contained, inherently solvable structure, an important part of why people are willing to approach them optimistically and unwaveringly? And can we leverage that for social good?
Yes. So this is a case where, first, it's good to think of the whole history of games again, and not just video games, because we know that people will try really hard at non-digital games to get better and achieve extraordinary things that no one has been able to achieve before. I mean, sports is a good example of this. And that's not a bounded universe. We don't know what we're capable of, but we keep trying and pushing to get better. So that it helps to open that up. But then also we can take problems that are not easily solvable within a finite structure and find ways to create solvable structures. So this game we were talking about at University of Washington, it's called Fold It. And what they did was they found a way to make curing cancer have a solvable structure within it, which was that the gamers were challenged to get better at the supercomputers, at 10 specific protein folding challenges. And so, the game wasn't go solve cancer and let us know when you're done. It was here are 10 specific challenges that would really help us understand a path to curing cancer. You collectively, amongst yourselves, we think you can do it, but we don't know. Good luck, here you go. And that actually was sufficient, that the gamers were able to beat the computers on 5 out of 10 within 6 months. So, yes, obviously games are designed to be won, and real life problems aren't. But that doesn't mean we can't learn from games about designing structured challenges that do make it feel possible and to provoke the optimism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, games have rules, and so whatever, you're going to always create certain limits within a game environment, which is, I guess, sometimes why they're nicer to be in than reality, where sometimes, you really don't know what an outcome's going to be, and it can be scary or depressing and all that. In a game, it's a controlled environment. So
yeah, but I really don't think the environment, I think this is a real distraction from what's happening. Just to give you guys one more example, what game designers are doing is they're inventing challenges that provoke curiosity. That's the most important part, not the bounded world. So if I were to ask you guys to try and get out of here tonight without touching the floor, and you can't move any of the chairs or whatever, or see if you could do it. Yeah, good luck. You guys would do some pretty amazing things to make that happen if you were committed to figuring out if you could do it. And that's what we're trying to design games like that, where we can give you a challenge. We don't know, I have no idea if you guys could get out that door without anybody touching the floor, but it would be really, I think it would be fun to try and see if that could happen. And you guys would come up with some really amazing things to try. So that's the kind of problem solving we're looking at. Not that you have to fix everything right away, but that will unlock creativity and get teamwork at a scale that we haven't tried before. Yeah.
Let's see. So a few more questions here. Is the capacity for games to do good limitless? Or are there limits to how much exposure people's society should have to playing games?
Yeah. Is it limitless? I mean, probably not. We'll start there. I'm sure there are limits. I mean, right. I don't think we've hit the limits. I don't think we're near the limits. My dream that I say is, right now we're spending 3 billion hours a week playing games. I'd like to see that up to 21 billion hours a week. And the way you get that math is to have 3 billion people playing for an hour a day. So I think it would be a great goal to get half the planet on the internet. That would be the first thing that you'd have to do, and that would be awesome just to get that done. And an hour a day, which gamers today spend between 10 and 16 hours a week already. So this is actually a reduction in game time in a way. But I think the key is to play just enough to provoke these positive emotions, to strengthen the relationships, and to prime us to solve really hard problems collaboratively. So yeah, it's not a limitless plan. You know, I think there are reasonable limits that we get benefit from within those limits.
Well, it really does seem like it's very early days for computer and digital games. I mean, this, you know, we really have no idea how far this can go. And as technology is developing at the speed with which it's developing and things get faster, the internet gets faster. So for the moment, it may be temporarily seem limitless.
Yeah, but it's something fun to imagine. I mean, we know what games look like with the number of people on the internet today. We have 110 million people playing Cityville. That's the largest number of people who've ever played the same game at the same time. And just imagine what that could be like if we had 1 billion people playing the same game at the same time. It's just, you start to, we don't know what that would be like. We have no idea what it would be like to have that many people playing the same game. But it's worth looking forward to and making sure that the game we have, when we have 1 billion people ready to play, is worthy of their attention.
Fair enough. Let's see. Computer games are dependent on designers and programmers. No game can provide all possible variables. How do we solve complex problems if the game prevents the player from thinking outside the box, especially when current game design is mostly linear?
Okay, great. Most of the games that I'm proposing as solutions are not simulations, which means they're not bounded at all by code. You know, World Without Oil is a great example. We gave you some facts, but you provided the real life data. You know your life, your neighborhood, what would actually happen by going out and trying it for real. The game we did with the World Bank Institute called Evoke, you had to go out into the real world and do things. You had to convert a power source for something you used every day. You had to actually increase someone's food security, find a way to get them better food. So a lot of these games that I'm proposing are not, it's not simulation, it's real action, and that's how you solve real problems. But even a game like Fold It, you know, they actually can simulate very effectively all the ways, dimensions that a protein can fold. I mean, that is a known problem, and they've got it. They've got all the dimensions, they've got all the different amino acids, and they've got it. So some games you solve that way when you can model it, and some games you do with real action. Yeah.
You know, I actually just wanted to bring in this game because I found it really interesting. It's a little bit of an aside, but this was a game that brought older people and younger people together. And it was mostly that I was very touched by this because I often feel like older people in our society are not brought in enough.
Yeah.
And so I wondered if you could explain that game a little bit. I thought that was very intriguing and the potential to do that, bringing generations together, I really liked.
Yeah, this is a game called Bounce. This is actually also online. You can go look for Bounce the game and find it and play it. I was actually at University of California, Berkeley, and asked by a task force looking into social isolation among seniors to see if we could make a game that would improve social connection, particularly that seniors missed intergenerational social interaction. They might see each other a lot, but they missed interacting with younger generations. So we created a conversation game that would be played over the phone. You only need one player in front of the computer, and in our case, it was usually the younger player. You have to play it with 2 people who are at least 20 years apart in age. And the game gives you 10 minutes to answer 10 questions where you're trying to come up with the same answer being true for both of you. For example, what is a body of water that you both have swum in? What is a book you've both recommended to a friend? What's something that makes you nervous? and you have a conversation with your partner to come up with an answer. Like, okay, well, where are you from? I'm in California. Me too. So I'm in the Pacific Ocean? Yes. Well, you get more points for more unusual answers because we document in the database. So Pacific Ocean would be pretty boring. We should try and think of a lake. And then at the end of the game, after you've told all these stories and learned about each other, we just give you a little poem that consists solely of your answers. So, you know, swimming in the Atlantic Ocean, in the farm, making the snickerdoodles, I was afraid of the shark, you know, whatever. And then you get to print out this little poem as a record of your, and these are all shared experiences, so you built up a connection. What we found was really interesting. You know, we went to senior centers to try and recruit seniors to play test it with us. And when we said we wanted them to play a game, it was like, oh, I don't want to play a computer game, totally not interested, bye. So then when we said, well, we're going to have somebody call you, and they're going to ask you questions about your life, and you're going to have to try and, you know, answer 10 questions in 10 minutes. They were like, I'm ready, where's the phone? And so that was an example of the word game being off-putting, computer game being off-putting, but it turned out that they actually did want to play. We just couldn't call it a computer game. So.
Yeah, and it also showed you actually did some research on the results too, the impact it had on the older people.
Well, in terms of improved mood and sense of social connection.
Yeah, and that I see that as a sort of major issue.
Yeah, and this is also good, by the way, for grandkids to call their grandparents. So it doesn't have to be just some stranger that you don't know. You know, I played it with my grandfather. Actually, he helped play test too, which was awesome. But you know, I think grandkids, they don't know what to talk to their grandparents about. But this game gives them, you know, something to do, which is always a good springboard to social interaction, is give someone a concrete mission.
Indeed. So any research on personality and genetics linked to competitive versus cooperative game preference?
Yeah. Well, not genetics so much, but in terms of demographic profiles, women almost exclusively prefer co-op to competitive when they're given a chance to compare both play styles. It's not, you know, not every woman, but there's more preference. And teenage boys are very drawn to competition. And, you know, why does this happen? I mean, everybody has theories, but it's just something we see in player data, what people choose to play of their own volition. So, you know, there are ways you can get benefits from both styles. Competitive is of most benefit when you're competing against someone you know in real life, and most likely to lead to anger when you lose if you're playing against a stranger online. So, you know, that's something I always recommend. If you're a competitive person, it's better to play with people you know than not. But that's really the only thing we've seen. I haven't seen any like age demographics around that, other than teenage boys are really, and you know, 20-something boys. Usually once people have families, they get drawn more into playing with their kids, and so that tends to be more cooperative gameplay.
Yeah, that makes sense. Take a couple more questions, and then I think we'll have to call it quits. Solving serious, complex problems calls for expertise, notwithstanding the wisdom of crowds. Asking large numbers of people to address such problems somebody's handwriting there, the text of a game without equipping them with relevant expertise ensures suboptimal results. But no one wants to be lectured at while gaming, so a serious problem of pedagogy presents itself where solution requires a collaboration between game designers and subject matter experts.
Yeah. Well, I think the two of the games we've been talking about a lot are perfect examples of ways to tackle this. Fold It, I mean, anybody who has questions about whether or not this can work, if you don't play Fold It, then you are cheating yourself out of some insight here. Fold It takes people who know nothing about biochemistry and teaches them over the first few levels how to do it. And gamers are learning how to fold proteins. It's an unavoidable truth. People with no training. So there are ways to design games where you learn stuff. But World Without Oil is another great example, because we were asking you to tell us what you would do in your real life if this crisis occurred. And you actually do have expertise about what you would do. And that was Ken's original idea, that nobody knows what will happen in a peak oil scenario, except every person in this room could figure out what they would be most likely to do. And that is where you get collective wisdom coming into play. It's where you see in World of Warcraft people, responding to the pandemic, and it turns out to be useful information. So you can approach different problems in different ways. Some games harness the real insight you already have, and some games are figuring out how to give you new skills and abilities. And it is extraordinary. I mean, it is unbelievable that ordinary people know scientific methods that it took many other people PhD programs to accomplish. But that's one of the great promises of games.
This next question, I think I want to end with this because I also had a nice conversation with Ken earlier about this issue. So this person says, I returned from Afghanistan 9 months ago, where beyond fighting, I designed a social game. I can't help feel that gaming could dispel separations that feed to war. Do you feel games could help end the practice of war, and how? And I thought about a conversation I had with Ken about a game he did that helped people get to know each other or find things in common with each other. I think that might be a way, and you also did, you did an Olympic game too.
Right, yes.
Right, I mean,
Yeah.
but I'll let you answer.
Yeah, first of all, I'd say, is John Yost in the audience? Show of hands, anyone? Oh, there you are. You have to restrain me from talking about our secret project. So I have said many times that it's my goal to see a game developer be nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize. I do think it's possible to use global games as a way to create the foundations for peace. Stanford University has a great research program on peace and innovating peace. It's called the Peace Innovation Lab. And they've done a lot of research as to what are the precursors to peace, what are the ways that you have to change in how people think, what they believe that will lay the groundwork for peace. And so one of the things we're interested at Social Chocolate in doing is using that research to make games that create the foundations for global peace. I didn't give away too much secret information, did I? Thumbs up. Okay, good.
Well, yeah. No, and we were talking about, with Ken, I was talking about a game that he had worked on where people walked up to strangers and said, hey, we're collecting information about what people have in common. Well, the two of you talk amongst yourself and discover something that you have in common. And they initially thought, oh, it would be something like, oh, we're both Virgos or something. But actually, once people got talking, they seemed to want to know more and get deeper than just that superficial level. Yeah. And I thought, well, that's exciting, if you can get people talking in that way. Right. I wanted to end by letting you do a little bit of a reading. Oh, yeah. From the book. Yeah, so here I'm going to ruin the surprise twist ending. I hope you guys have already read the book. Right, you're going to hear the end of the plot, so if you don't want to know. Shocker. Okay, so the book is called Reality is Broken, but the conclusion is called Reality is Better. Sorry to spoil that ending. And it starts with this great excerpt of a little poem that was called The Litany Against Fantasy Worlds. Written by a futurist, and it reads, if I'm going to be happy anywhere, or achieve greatness anywhere, or learn true secrets anywhere, or save the world anywhere, or feel strongly anywhere, or help people anywhere, I may as well do it in reality. So that's sort of where the book ends up, thinking that we can do all these things in reality. And just to share a little bit more with you, we can no longer afford to view games as separate from our real lives and our real work. It is not only a waste of the potential of games to do real good, it is simply untrue. Games don't distract us from our real lives. They fill our real lives with positive emotions, positive activity, positive experiences, and positive strengths. Games aren't leading us to the downfall of human civilization. They're leading us to its reinvention. The great challenge for us today, and for the remainder of the century, is to integrate games more closely into our everyday lives and to embrace them as a platform for collaborating on our most important planetary efforts. If we commit to harnessing the power of games for real happiness and real change, then a better reality is more than possible. It is likely.
And in that case, our future together will be quite extraordinary. Surprise ending, sorry.
The surprise ending. Well, there's the book. Jane McGonigal, Reality is Broken. And I guess I want to say, Jane, it's been fun.
Yes, it's been fun.